And welcome back to another episode of Locked On Chiefs. I am Chris Clark. This is Locked On Chiefs, your daily podcast covering the Kansas City Chiefs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for always making the Locked On Chiefs podcast your first listen of the day. Don't forget, we're free and available on all platforms, including YouTube as well, where you can go like, subscribe, and comment if you would like as well. I am your host, Chris Clark. You can find me at Chiefs Corner on Twitter. And this is going to be Seth Keysor. We're going to have him as a guest today, talking about all things free agency and really getting into what is going on. When we get back, we're going to dive into free agency and what the Chiefs could still do to get ready for this season.
From the land of the free and the home of the Chiefs, this is the Locked On Chiefs podcast.
Welcome back. Hey, Seth, how are you doing, bud? It's been a while.
I'm doing really, really well. How are you?
I'm doing well. It's been too long, sir. It has been too long.
Yeah, it feels like that time just keeps flying by, and the content just keeps spewing, and it's hard to find time to do everything you feel like doing. But it's good to be back. It feels like just yesterday to me that I was on with you guys twice a week at least, and we were having a ball. And I don't know what to tell you. Time just boom, it hits. And it's kind of similar to like how, once you can start signing free agents and you don't, that time just goes by very quickly.
Well, I'll never forget 4 years ago when the Alex Smith trade broke, or 3 years ago when the Alex Smith trade broke, and you and Ryan and I were on, weren't we?
Yeah.
That was quite the ordeal.
Yeah, that was awesome.
Let's go ahead and talk about free agency, because Kansas City has not been very involved in this process so far yet this year. Obviously, they have one free agent signing. They brought back Michael Burton. They signed a couple of guys to their EFRAs in Jody Fortson and Derek Gore, which I like both of those moves.
Yeah.
And they brought back Chad Henne, it sounds like, for about $2 million a year.
Mm-hmm. Those are all common sense things that they've done. Burton, I really, the fact that the Chiefs feel the need to have a fullback on the roster will never not be funny to me at this point. But Mike Burton's a good fullback. He's done everything that's been asked of him. He actually does pretty well with the ball in his hands. He's a good blocker, good special teams guy. So I get it. It's just unfortunate he plays a bit of an antiquated position in terms of number of snaps he's going to get per year. But, bringing him back, I think it's a decent move. Bringing everyone that they've done so far makes sense. I really like the Justin Reed signing. Mm-hmm. I think for a pretty decent deal, he brings a certain amount of athleticism and physicality to the defense. It's tough to find a guy that's both physical and a pretty good twitch athlete. But yeah, other than that, all's quiet on the Western Front. And I'm curious what the plan is.
Yeah, no, I can understand that. I will do my best Ryan Tracy impression right now and say, how dare you when you talk about the fullback position, but it is what it is. And I get what you're saying. It makes sense that that is an antiquated position. They don't use it a ton. But I think the value in it for Kansas City isn't necessarily that he's a fullback, although I think that they like that. It's that he's a core special teams guy as well. And I think that really plays a lot into it with Burton. When you look at a guy like Jody Fortson, I think there's a lot to be excited about with him coming back. Hopefully he can get the explosion back that he had last year, because I think he added something to this offense, and I think it was going to be a big piece of the offense, or a much bigger piece of the offense moving forward after how he started off the season.
His role just kept increasing in small increments, and it was really unfortunate that he basically got hurt after his best performance and the most that they'd asked out of him all season. And every time that they've given him a little bit more to do, he's done it. Yep. That little bit more. And I'm going to be writing about him maybe post-draft, maybe pre-draft. I don't know. I'm still trying to decide. Ryan's still trying to get me to look at prospects. I'm going to be writing about some of the stuff that he did, and I wrote about it during the season, that, they were asking him to do a few things in terms of blocking that their tight ends need to be able to do, not necessarily inline stuff. And so it wasn't just the receiving that he was showing that he could do. And every time they gave him a chance, he completed the assignment and completed it well. And that's a big deal. So I'm excited about him. Obviously, anyone from the Times Ours podcast, you say Jody Fortson, we say yes. But everything else has been, I don't know if the expectations were different this year, but there's definitely a little more angst than there was this time last year in terms of free agency stuff.
Yeah, I think not getting back to the Super Bowl has a part of that, but also you start looking at the laundry list of players that the Chiefs lost to free agency this year, and there are some very good players that they lost. Shavarius Ward's one of them. It doesn't look like Tyrann Mathieu is coming back, and I get it because they're moving on to Justin Reed, but that's another player that had a lot of leadership on this defense that is not going to be back. Anthony Hitchens was already let go. They did restructure Frank Clark, which I thought was a very interesting move.
With Clark, looking at what they did, it's essentially the same cap hit this year. It's like in $1 million more or something like that. And you're the cap guy. But my understanding it's like $1 million or $1.5 million more than it would have been. And then next year is basically a facade.
Right.
It's not real. And so
it's kind of like a void year, but not quite.
Yeah. And so I guess I get it. But at the same time, Frank Clark didn't provide much more juice than Mike Dana most of the time he was out there last year. He had a stretch of about 3 or 4 games, and I wrote about it when it was happening because you could see the impact it had everywhere else, where he played not at high a level that he did in Seattle, but at a pretty high level to where he wasn't just playing above average rushing the passer. He was playing well. And you saw the impact it had on the defense because that was after Ingram had arrived. And then you had your best pass rusher in Jones, a good pass rusher in Clark, and a good pass rusher in Ingram. And then you got that complimentary pass rush. I guess to me, we haven't seen it. And so for me, the opportunity cost with him isn't just about the money. I get it. I really do. They said, it's tough to find average defensive ends in free agency.
Yep.
We're, for $1.5 million, which is essentially what it is for them. For me, the opportunity cost is the snaps, because I'm concerned, and I think I'm right in this, that they believe, so we've got one of the edge positions taken care of. And I'd argue that they don't, because what we've seen from Clark the last couple seasons isn't taken care of for a defensive line that's supposed to be the primary part of the defense.
And I would agree with you. I don't think that they do have that position taken care of. I think that as long as the numbers come out like what it's been reported, and we're still waiting to find out the exact numbers on that restructure to find out that that's the case, then I think it makes a lot of sense, because they're looking at it going, okay, well, if we cut him, it cost us like $13 million to keep him. It's going to be like, $11 million or $12 million or whatever. So that makes sense to keep him from that perspective. Also, if you're going to bring in another star pass rusher or any kind of person to replace him, you're going to have to pay another 15 or 16 million on top of that. So it's going to get very expensive to get that guy. Although you look at what Chandler Jones got, and that's a whole different deal. So when we get back, we're going to talk a little bit more about free agency and what is going on. What can Kansas City be doing? But before we get there, I want to tell you about our friends over at BetOnline. So that time of year again is college basketball. The tournament is finally upon us. From all the latest odds, contests, and player props, BetOnline.net is the #1 source for all your sports betting needs and info. BetOnline remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. It's not just basketball. BetOnline is continued source for your sporting wagering information needs, including live betting in your favorite Vegas casino games. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn about the trends in action. BetOnline, where the game starts. Now, if we start getting into this and we start looking at who is left in free agency, Chandler Jones just went off the market. He is going to the Raiders. That's a big problem in Kansas City, because you don't have a right tackle right now. You can say that Lucas Niang is going to step in and he's going to be the right tackle, but with his injury last year, I'm not sure he plays the first couple of weeks of the season. He may not play until midway through the season. We just don't know at this point. So where are your questions right now that Kansas City needs to answer? Obviously, edge rush is one we've already talked about.
I mean, the entire defensive line. I mean, it's I think part of the source of the angst for Chiefs fans is that last year they talked about addressing the offensive line, and they immediately came out and not only signed Joe Thuney, which, people liked, but they also tried to sign Trent Williams. I mean, and even that effort out there, people were angsty about it, but you could see what they were trying to do there. Then they signed, even like a guy like Austin Blythe before the draft, going out there and trying to get, a starting caliber center. And then obviously it's easy for us to forget that 2/5 of the revamping of the line took place on draft night. And so I can understand why people are getting a little angsty, but they saw that activity over the course of a month,
Right.
And then we're hoping to see some activity over the course of a few days. I do think that immediate gratification, I mean, okay, they signed a really high-level player, at least one. Now you can kind of build around that guy, and you don't see that right now. Now, the good news is they already have a high-caliber player, even higher-caliber player on the other side of the line in Jones they can build around. But they had him last year, and one guy does not create a pass rush. We've all seen this. And there's a reason why the Rams doubled and tripled and quadrupled down despite Aaron Donald's existence. So I understand, we've already talked about edge rush, but really the whole defensive line, they claimed it as an area of priority. And so far we've seen nothing. Actually, a step back from what we had last year, because last year they finally had Ingram at least. And we haven't seen anything with regards to him. The other thing is, like you alluded to, cornerback. Charvarius Ward he was the best corner on the team last year. He's been consistent. He's been solid. There's a reason he got paid what he got paid. And so you see the Chiefs take a step backwards there as well. And so I think you can see why people are getting a little, because you see a bunch of corners are off the market, a bunch of defensive linemen are off the market, and those are the places that they need help. And so,
in that deal with Ward, I would have done.
Oh, me
personally.
too. Yep. I mean, well, I would have done the deal for Ward. I would have done the deal J.C. Jackson got, or Carlton Davis. All of Davis and Jackson especially got smaller paydays than I was expecting.
Oh, me too. I was expecting them to be really close to $20 million a year. So I absolutely would have done the deal with Charvarius Ward. I think he was going to be. I think he's a player that is still ascending and still getting better. So I think he was worth it. But they definitely are going to have questions when it comes to the corner position. If you flip it over to the other side of the ball, I know we're still talking about wide receiver. The interesting thing to me there is you have Christian Kirk who signed, you have Zay Jones who signed, and then you have another guy that signed another contract with the Lions. I'm forgetting his name right now, but it was a 1-year deal, and you start looking
DJ Chark.
Thank you. You start looking at those types of deals. Throw Christian Kirk and Zay Jones out, because I think the Jacksonville Jaguars I don't know what they're on, but they're throwing way too much money at people that don't deserve it. But you look at like Chark's deal, I think that's a deal that Kansas City could do. But they have to get the cap situation figured out. And right now the question is why haven't they converted, or why don't they have the cap space if they have converted Patrick Mahomes' deal, which we don't know about yet. It hasn't been announced. But that's a move that we expect coming that would free up, $22 million in cap space. So they do have room to be able to make some additions. It just may be Friday before they do it.
Right. And I've heard that floating around a little bit. And that would be, I'm curious about why that would be. I'm not familiar with any rules regarding that. And so I have no idea why that might exist. That might be, maybe it's a cash flow thing as opposed to a cap space thing. And that's something that people tend to forget, particularly when talking about NFL owners or NFL owners with the last name Hunt. Sometimes, maybe it's a matter of, hey, we got to wait till Friday because I don't have $22 million in liquid asset right at the moment to devote to this thing. Now, does Clark Hunt have $22 million? Yes. Could he write a
many times over?
Yeah. Could he write a $22 million check tomorrow? Of course he could. Right. But, being worth $5 billion, whatever he's worth, doesn't mean that you automatically have $5 billion in cash. And also you generally, billionaires don't stay billionaires by spending that kind of money unless it's, no, I know I have this here set up how I want. So maybe that's it. That's pure speculation on my part, by the way.
Well, I would imagine that the cash really doesn't matter at this point, because generally speaking, just because you sign a deal or you say you're going to sign a deal, you're not going to get that signing bonus that day. So I wouldn't think that would matter.
Right.
I get the question though. I mean, that's a valid question. Because that money that Mahomes is going to get is set aside for Mahomes right now.
Right.
So that is a big question.
And generally speaking, when you've got certain amount of guarantees and that kind of stuff, you got to keep a certain amount of cash in a trust. And so I'm curious what the long-term plan is. I'm willing to be patient. Like it's frustrating to watch, I think, seeing guys that I would have loved to see in Kansas City end up in LA or end up with Oakland, or not Oakland, with Vegas, or end up with Denver. I mean, that's frustrating to watch because basically you've got the entire AFC West making moves that, man, I really like those moves. That's a frustrating thing to see. And so it really, I think that adds to the angst. Is there a long-term plan? Sure. Is it one that I'll like? That I don't know. And
That's the question.
yeah, and sometimes just the way that they view players is different than the way we view players.
Right.
And that's that tingling little fear that I have in the back of my head, because obviously I'm right and they're wrong if we disagree. But it makes me wonder, how do they view Clark's level of play last year? Do they think that's starting caliber as a pass rusher, especially? Because if they do, then the Chiefs and I would have completely different priorities. That's maybe starting caliber, what he did most of last year, if you've got a really strong secondary and he's like your third or fourth best pass rusher at best.
Right.
Because he just isn't moving the needle much. So that's my fear, is that they see things just differently. Same things whatever they see that makes Willie Gay a 30% snap count guy and makes Ben Neiman a 60% snap count guy. And I think that's where Chiefs fans are just a little antsy. And maybe by the time we get past the draft, it looks like just as good a plan. Because by the time we got past the draft and they had drafted Smith, they had drafted Humphrey, then they traded for Orlando Brown, it was like, well, this is pretty sweet. Maybe we see something similar. Maybe, they trade for Danielle Hunter and we're all like, okay. And that's probably the thing I would remember the most if I were to remind Chiefs fans of anything. You're like 2 good free agent signings from being thrilled. That's not a bad place to be.
No, I think they've addressed the safety position. You have questions at corner, but you figure that they're probably going to be looking at drafting a corner. They have questions at DN, but they're probably going to look at drafting at DN. Now, whether or not you can get somebody that's going to be able to step in and give you, good snaps year one is a big question. But, you get over to the other side of the ball, you start looking at wide receiver. Juju Smith-Schuster's still sitting out there. Jarvis Landry's still sitting out there. I think those are guys that could step in, and now Julio Jones is going to be out there as well. You look at guys that could step in and help this offense day one. Now there's question marks about, durability when it comes to actually all 3 of them, unfortunately.
Right. And that's going to be a question with anyone they grab right now. And it's worth noting, even if they say signed Allen Robinson, everyone would freak out. But Allen Robinson was hurt and had a down year last year.
Yep.
So there's questions, although he's younger, so that's helpful. But I mean, they're close enough to having addressing the safety position was good, but that feels like treading water.
Right.
And when you see the rest of the division getting better and better, and with how the year ended, not just how the year ended last year, I think people put a little too much stock in that. I think you have to think about what consistency looked like last year. And the Chiefs were not consistent last year.
No, and they started off really poor, and if they would have played better, I think it would have helped them down the stretch. But again, don't have enough weapons on offense. I think that really hurt them. When we get back, I do want to talk about the rest of the division, what they've done so far, because I think that really is going to play into what the Chiefs are going to be able to do this season. But before we get there, I want to tell you about our friends over at Rock Auto. If you want to go save time and money, go use rockauto.com. Why choose to spend 30%, maybe even 100% more for the same parts from a chain store or car dealership? Go to Rock Auto. It's a family business serving do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years. Rock Auto prices are reliably low for every customer. They have everything you could need: brake parts, tail lamps, motor oil, and even new carpet. Anything that your car needs, they have it. Go to rockauto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car or truck right locked on in their How Did You Hear About Us box, so they know that we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the car parts your car will ever need, rockauto.com. All right, so if we jump into free agency for the rest of the AFC West, you start looking at what the Raiders are doing. They signed Max Crosby to an extension. They signed Chandler Jones. They traded away Ngakoue to the Colts. The Broncos are adding pass rush. The Chargers traded for pass rush. A lot of questions when it comes to the right tackle position for Kansas City, but pass rush is going to be something that is aplenty everywhere but Kansas City right now.
Right. Right now, the Chiefs have Chris Jones as a proven, consistent, above average. And obviously Jones is much more than above average, but that's how low the bar is everywhere else. Because Frank Clark has not been a consistently above average pass rusher for 2 years. And some would argue 3, because 2019 was back and forth for him due to injury. So you have Chris Jones, and that's it. That's bad. That's something they're going to need to figure that out. I think with other teams in the AFC West, I don't know if everyone is formulating their game plans completely around the Chiefs, but it kind of feels like it. And that makes sense. People did it with the Patriots for years. So I think with how teams played the Chiefs last year, I think you're seeing, at least in the division, we're going to double and triple down on this rush for drop 7, play conservative, over the top, and force it either run the ball or, have these 15-play drives. Now, the Chiefs showed that Mahomes and the Chiefs, they adapted really well to that down the stretch last year until, you get to the second half of the Bengals game. People are talking about that was drop 3, rush 8. They did that in the first half too, and Mahomes tore it apart. He just played badly. And I'm like preaching that gospel everywhere I talk, just because I think people need to understand. It's like, well, what happened against the Bengals? Mahomes played badly.
And it was so weird because he played so well in the first half.
Oh yeah, he was crushing.
Except for that one play at the very end of the half.
And even that, I can understand why he threw the ball to Hill there. Maybe he thinks Hill's going to run out of bounds or score.
Well, he thought there was a timeout. He tried to take a timeout right afterwards.
I'm curious if he really thought there was a timeout or if he just thought might as well try. Because it's not like it's a technical like it is in basketball. It's like, I don't think there is, but hey, maybe, who knows?
Well, and what's the worst they're going to do? Penalize him when the clock is out anyway.
Yeah.
So.
And so I've always viewed it as that, like, maybe. And then, and again, he'll cut back inside. Mm-hmm. Low key, terrible choice. And, with Mahomes, if you freeze frame that when Mahomes chooses to throw that, now people talk about, oh, he could have looked right and could have done, and he could have, for sure. That play was a one-off, though. That was, you throw it to Hill or you do nothing. When you look at it there, I would have said, yeah, Hill scores 9 times out of 10 here.
Well, if Hill's on the 1 yard line as opposed to on the 4 yard line when he catches the ball, that's a completely different play.
Right. Well, and it was a goofy play overall as it is. But I think about that play a lot just because I can see why he threw it, even though he shouldn't have. It's like, well, Hill will either run out of bounds or score. And normally he would have, but he didn't. So what are you going to do? But that really is, he played badly. And so it really is easy as Chiefs fans to get angsty and worry. And I think
Seth's word of the day,
angsty. I think it's more of the way the season went last year than the way the season ended. Because, they played an all-time classic against a really good Bills team and beat them. Mm-hmm. They destroyed a Steelers team. They're a Super Bowl contender if they don't sign another soul. You'd have to sign some guys to fill out the roster, but you know what I mean.
Right, yeah.
But it is just, I think it's just hard when you see other teams improving, at least on paper, and you worry about what the process is for that, especially when you saw some cracks in the foundation last year.
And I think that's the key, what you just said, though, on paper. I'm not saying that the Broncos aren't going to be better with Russell Wilson. They obviously are. I'm not going to say that their pass rush isn't going to be better with who they added, or, the Raiders isn't going to be better, or the Chargers. But Khalil Mack's been hurt. So is he going to be able to play? Joey Bosa's been hurt. Are they going to be able to play multiple games together? That's a big question. The Chargers are always going to be a question in my mind because how many years have we been hearing the Chargers are going to win the AFC West?
Right.
And the Chiefs have won it 6 years in a row. So I think that when you start looking on paper, you have a lot of questions. And if Kansas City doesn't come out of this with a bunch of signings, I'll be a little surprised because I still expect that they're going to bring in a wide receiver. I still think they want a defensive end. The question is, are they going to be able to find somebody that fits under their cap? And I wouldn't be surprised if they look at the corner market and try to bring in somebody either. But a lot of things to get done in the draft, and I think they have the capital to do it. I don't think that Veach is going to take all 9 picks.
Sure. I don't think he will either. It's just tough to count on rookies to contribute. The Chiefs have had unusual luck there. Yep. It's tough to expect that to continue. And even if you got them, especially along the defensive line, that's hard to find. So I think you're going to see them signing some guys because, it's kind of funny, everyone has their feelings and that kind of stuff. And we'll see, maybe they do need to wait to Friday, and suddenly Friday, maybe they, extend Tyreek Hill's contract and restructure Mahomes' deal. Suddenly they're sitting in a slew of cash and they sign, I don't know, they sign Akeem Hicks, Von Miller, and Juju Smith-Schuster. And everyone will be like, holy crap. And that would be great. But as of right now, and that's one of the problems, everyone's always like, wait and see. Well, your job, my job, is to provide content and provide commentary on the world as it is, not how it might be in a month. Like I'm happy to talk to what might happen in a month. Who knows what might happen in a month? But you have to think, okay, this is where we're at right now. And right now, where they're at has been quieter than I would have liked. Zadarius Smith's deal, $8.5 million a year, and that's exaggerating it because of the way guarantees work and stuff. I understand he's coming off an injured year. I would have done that deal. But we'll see.
Right.
We'll see. Because that's the point that they've reached in terms of edge rusher. There's just not a lot out there. I mean, Jadeveon Clowney is a guy they've had chances at repeatedly, and they've never done that, partly because I don't know if he fits Spags' ideal of what a 43, what an edge guy looks like. Right. Although they went outside the norm with Ingram there for opposite reasons. And they had success there. And that actually, we don't have time, but that would get me down a whole rabbit hole of the idea of having your profile of guys just makes me crazy. Like, say, Melvin Ingram, for example. It's like, well, he doesn't have the length and weight that, generally speaking, Spags looks for in his edge defenders. And to me, it's like, well, why do you care about length? Well, you want to be able to set the edge. Can Melvin Ingram set the edge? Yes.
Yeah,
that's all that should matter.
Yeah, then length doesn't matter. No, absolutely.
Can they do the thing that is the reason you care about the other thing? Because then I don't care. It's like when people care about footwork. Can he throw the ball properly? Can he throw it with accuracy consistently? Then I don't care what his footwork looks like.
Right.
Generally speaking, sure, you try to fix it, but whatever. And so there's guys available still, and the Chiefs have a lot of chances to unangsty the fan base. But right now, I'm kind of the resident optimist, and I think my tweet today was today stinks.
Yeah, I saw that. And so real quick before I let you go, because we need it, because it's way past time, but if you were looking at this roster right now, obviously they've added a safety, so that's probably not a huge need. But where are you looking that they need help on offense and defense? I know we've talked about edge, we've talked about corner, and defensive tackle a little bit as well. Where else are you looking?
Pretty much it. I mean, you know,
on offense, are you thinking right tackle?
They've got a couple directions they can go there. I think right tackle does make sense to at least look at, because you're seeing, you're going to have dual threat edge rushers in every divisional game. Mm-hmm. Although I don't think you necessarily game plan for the division. You game plan also around your strengths. And I like Lucas Niang. The tape he put on last year, I've got to really go through it. It looked okay, not great, but okay, especially as a run blocker. He moves really well for a guy his size, but he got hurt a lot last year. Like you said, he might not be available at the start of the year. And he got hurt, he got hurt to close out his college career. That's a concern.
And he took a year off. So, even coming back after a year off, not being able to stay healthy.
And so he might, so the Chiefs might want to look into having stability at the position. And also, let's say if they signed like, Billy Turner or Trent Brown or someone like that, they could have a very, very, very strong argument for the absolute best offensive line in the league at that point. Because I don't think there's a better interior than Tooney, Humphrey, Smith. I think that's the best interior in the league. And while Brown he's a top 10 tackle, left tackle at least. He's not Trent Williams. We all know that, but he's got a lot of strengths, and he does well against elite competition. You grab a guy who can really play above average at the right tackle spot, I think it's a strong argument. So I could see them going that route, but really, the popular hits, the hits are a hit for a reason. Yep. And so, I would put like receiver and right tackle like this, because I think the big reason is you can grab a receiver in the draft. And that's
they don't play a lot of rookie receivers.
They what?
They don't play a lot of rookie receivers, and they don't have huge impacts. And I know they're not going to have a huge impact just because it's the Chiefs, Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce. But I think that's part of what hurt them last year is they didn't have that third guy like a Sammy Watkins from a couple of years ago that could take pressure off of, Hill and Kelce.
And I totally hear you on that, and I think you're correct. I also think that's something that I've gotten a little peeved at. And if you can't take a talented wide receiver and get production out of him in year one of your system, maybe your system needs some tweaking.
No, I agree with that. Yeah.
Like maybe you don't need everyone to be able to play, X, Y,
all three positions. Right.
And so that's something at least worth considering. But yeah, they really do. And I think that's another reason. Last year, is the least dominant they've looked during the regular season.
Yep.
In the Mahomes era. And so that is why you end up with people being a little more, they just didn't look as consistent. Now, 2019, they looked inconsistent during the regular season, but that was with Mahomes hurt for part of it. And then they won the Super Bowl. So that just washes that all away.
Right. So who cares?
2020, they looked dominant throughout the regular season. People were like, oh, they didn't win by as much. But I mean, they were blowing teams out, or they were just barely even trying and still pulling out wins.
Right.
It looked effortless. They made the Super Bowl. This last year, you saw cracks in the foundation in terms of inconsistency issues throughout the year. And that's problematic. And so I can see why fans are upset. And man, if they were counting me to cheer them up today, I feel kind of bad.
I will say this about Orlando Brown. I'm interested to see what a full offseason in this system does for him. Because you have to remember, he didn't get traded to Kansas City until April. Yes, he had time to change his body, change what he was doing, but he didn't know the system he was walking into. I wonder if he's going to be able to improve on what he did last year, and I expect that he's going to. So I think you're right. I think they have a chance of having one of the top offensive lines in football if they can get the right tackle position figured out. Absolutely. He is Seth Keysor. Tell them where they can find you, Seth.
You can find me on Twitter at RealMNChiefsFan. You can find me at the Chief of the North newsletter. You can find me at The Athletic. I'm everywhere. I'm everywhere. But primarily, the Chief of the North newsletter, look it up. You can subscribe for the price of a foot-long sub. And actually now it's probably cheaper than a foot-long sub because unlike everything else, we aren't suffering from inflation at the Chief of the North newsletter. So
that's true. You're
welcome for a break from the world.
Thank you all for listening today. We really appreciate it. We'll be back tomorrow to talk more about free agency and get into hopefully maybe some Chiefs news with some signings. But at this point, we've talked about what they've done at this point. Thanks again for listening, and we'll talk to you tomorrow.